pain. She felt it radiate throughout her entire body, from head to toe. It felt like thorny vines constricting her every muscle. She lay on her bed, arms and legs outstretched. Her face was contorted from the agony. Beads of sweat formed on her creased forehead. She trembled. Her chest rose and fell rapidly, to keep pace with her pounding heart. The pain constricting her body was only a symptom of a deeper pain that existed in her mind. The pain in her mind was the root, and the pain throughout her body were the extending branches. Voices boiled from the depths of her mind like a volcano increasing toward eruption. The voices were garbled and unintelligible, speaking in an alien tongue she could not decipher, but she could feel the emotions behind their muddled words, words that spewed hatred, fear, and sorrow. They were words saturated with poison, and that poison had infected her. The pressure was building. The time had come to release it again. Simple instinct had brought her to this point. There was only one way she knew of to pacify the voices. It was hard to move against the pain that enveloped her body, but she managed to curl her legs and move them over to the side of the bed, where she allowed herself to fall into a kneeling position beside the bed. She moaned and lay her head against the side of the bed with a moment to rest. Tears welled in her eyes. She lifted her head and looked at the side of her arm. Long white scars arced across her forearm from the previous times. She touched one of her scars, caressed it with her finger. Relief would come soon. She had met him at a party, something that wasn't normally her thing. Normally on the weekend, Judith took a long bath and read a book or binged a show. One evening, after coming home from work, she saw a flyer on her door. She almost crumpled it up and tossed it in the trash. But something made her stop. Life had seemed overly constricted and stagnant lately. Her routine was beginning to feel like a prison to her, like she was trapped in a bubble. She felt like a mechanical device or part, contributing to the function of an engine by completing the same movements and rotations day in and day out. Go to class at 7 a.m., then work her late morning 4-hour shift at the grocery store, sit through late afternoon classes, furiously taking notes, dinner, then another couple hours of study before bed. Both Judith's parents had been driven by careers. She had hardly spent any time with them growing up. Now she was driven to follow in their footsteps. It felt like she was hardwired to do it, like it was embedded in her DNA. Yet every so often, perhaps once a month, Judith had to stop and step out of her routine, just to make sure she was still human and not a robot on the verge of malfunction. Usually she would take a hike out in the hills or by the river, or she would browse stores in the mall. However, even those activities were beginning to feel like the machine of order, because she did them so often. But a party. This was new. This caused her to feel a little knot of nervous tension in her belly. This was unfamiliar chaos. The flyer was pretty basic. It announced a good time with dance and a few cold ones. Judith remained pretty relaxed with her outfit. A decent pair of jeans and a red V-neck blouse. And she did put on makeup, something she rarely did unless there was a very special occasion. She hated makeup. It made her feel fake, like she was a doll or something. She arrived at the apartment 10 minutes after the party had started. Her heart began to race when she heard the muffled sound of music on the other side of the door. She knocked. A flood of sound came upon her when the door opened. The next 15 minutes or so was like an outer-body experience for Judith. It felt like she left her body at the door and floated about the commotion with a beer in her hand. She only took one sip. She could hardly hear what anyone was saying over the music. Soon she found herself standing alone in one corner. When someone walked by, she forced a constrained smile on her face. She could feel sweat pouring down her sides. Man, how her heart raced. "You really ought to drink some of that." A male voice nearby startled her. "Huh?" she said, forcing that awkward smile when she saw him standing beside her. He was tall and broad-shouldered with a finely trimmed goatee. "I said you really shouldn't let that beer go to waste." He smiled crookedly at her, and she couldn't help but burst out laughing. "I'll drink it for you. I mean, if you don't want it." He snorted laughter, and she burst into giggles again. Oh, this was so bizarre. No, she sipped at it. "I want it. I'm just enjoying it, you know?" "Yeah, right," he said. "You're not enjoying nothing. Stiff and uncomfortable. You looked like a hollow statue standing over here. You gotta loosen up." She laughed again and drank down more of her beer. "This just isn't what I expected," she said. "What isn't? The beer?" "No, the party. Normally my nose is stuck in a book right now." "Ah, we've got the ambitious girl, the studious girl. What's your name?" "Judith," she said. She was beginning to feel a bit calmer now. Part of the reason was his voice. There was a charm in how he spoke, an optimistic bounce in each word that she liked. "Your name?" "Whatever you want to call me. What do I look like?" He raised his eyebrows. This gave her a small thrill. This time when she smiled, it came naturally. "How about Mark?" "Mark it is. You want to get out of here and take a walk? It's getting hot." He began to walk to the door. She couldn't help but follow. "Sure," she said. She was liking this. They talked for a good hour. They walked through the quiet neighborhood, occasionally stopping at a streetlight. She told him about her family, school, her job. He was studying psychology. This was the most comfortable she had felt in a conversation outside work or school in a long time. She didn't want it to end, which surprised her. She was beginning to feel semi-normal. Mark displayed a handsome charisma that drew her to him like a magnet. She also couldn't help but feel fascinated by the sense of mystery. "So what's your real name?" she said as they stopped at a street corner across from the apartments. He narrowed his eyes at her, smiling. "Not gonna tell you." "Oh, come on," she said, lightly and playfully patting him on the shoulder. It felt firm and rippling with muscle. Something else to uncover, she thought, and was surprised and a little embarrassed by the thought and the arousal she felt. Such feelings had laid dormant in her for so long, stifled by the order of her life. "I'll tell you if you do something for me." His eyes widened, and his smile grew. She felt her heart quicken, and a tingling of excitement waved through her as she imagined the possibilities. "Is that so?" She stepped closer. "What should I do for you?" "Can I hypnotize you?" His expression straightened to one of seriousness. Judith felt disappointed. Not what she expected. "What?" she said. "It's something I'm studying in my psych courses. Sometimes it's used to treat anxiety, depression, and bad habits. I just wanted to give it a try, you know?" She chuckled at the absurdity of the question. "Not sure what to say," she said. "A first for everything, I guess?" She winced at her own statement. "Look, you don't have to. I want to get real results. If I tried it with some of my friends, they'd just clown around and pretend that they were hypnotized. They can't take anything seriously." His demeanor had completely changed. The flirtatious playfulness was gone. He was suddenly all business, like a doctor dealing with a patient. This scared her a little bit. Maybe she was delving into something she'd regret. Was this guy, whose name she really didn't know, going to rape her, using a strange hypnotist session as his bait. She couldn't help but burst into giggles again. The scenario seemed so ridiculous. Mark's face contorted with confusion. She felt like she was a character in a bizarro horror movie, something she might watch late at night on a weekend with one of her roommates. Such movies usually got her yelling at the screen when the characters behaved so stupidly. She imagined someone watching her in that moment being depicted in a horror film, pointing and yelling, "No, idiot! Don't go in his apartment, he's the axe murderer!" "What's so funny?" Mark said. He was smiling now, too. "Oh, nothing." She shrugged. Yes, this experience was a little weird. Yes, his desire to hypnotize her was eccentric, a weird shift from the flirty behavior he demonstrated earlier. But the chances of him being the axe murderer? Slim. Besides, she had to admit it to herself. She was into him, okay? She was turned on by him, emotionally and physically. She could deal with some of his eccentricity, as long as this game he was clearly playing led to something deeper. "Look, I'll do it, as long as you tell me your real name and get me something to eat." "Deal." He winked at her. She winked back. She even took his hand as they walked back to his apartment. She wanted to give him a sign that she was looking for something more. "This isn't going to have any bad side effects, is it?" There, she got the question out. She had been meaning to ask, but didn't want to put a damper on the occasion. She didn't want to get hurt, either. "No, you should be fine. You might get a little dizzy afterwards, but overall nothing to worry about." She took a deep breath. Maybe it wouldn't even work anyway. They'd try it, have a laugh. She was surprised, though. Mystery Man Mark was serious about this. He really planned to hypnotize her. They sat across from each other in the center of the living room. A bookcase with psychology texts and rows of Blu-rays and DVDs sat against one wall next to a tall adjustable lamp and a recliner she presumed he used for a reading chair. Behind her was a small TV. A painting of variegated colors hung on the wall next to the TV. "So, I first want you to close your eyes." She complied. Oh, was this going to work? So many thoughts cluttered her mind like a swarm of insects fluttering in there. "Relax. Take a deep breath. Allow your mind to clear." She took a deep breath. It helped a little. Imagine you're all alone on a peaceful seashore. You can hear the waves. You smell the sea. You can feel the warm sun on the back of your neck. These details helped. She began to visualize herself on a seashore. She utilized memories from her childhood, from a time when she visited a beach. She saw some seaweed washed up on the shore. She imagined grinding her toes in the slimy texture of it. You're all alone. You feel peaceful. Nothing at all can harm you here. This is your place, your domain. The warm sun shines on your back. You hear the waves roll. You feel a gentle breeze blow through your hair. She became very relaxed as her visualization consumed her mind. Gentle, caressing vibrations enveloped her body. It felt a little like she was pleasantly melting, liquefying into a completely different substance. "A door appears before you," Mark said. "A door floating a few inches off the ground. This door can be any you want. Any color, made of anything you want it to be. It's your door. It leads to a special place in your mind, a place of truth and discovery." Judith visualized the white-painted closet door in her bedroom with the silver handle. "Open the door," Mark said. "Step inside." She took the handle and opened the door. She found a dark void beyond it. She felt hesitant to step through, but did eventually. Once you step through, you find yourself falling. down deep into the earth. You fall through the layers of soil. You see worms, rocks, and roots of plants. You see fossils embedded in the earth. Down, down. Soon you reach an opening, a cavernous place. There's a small lake within this place. You fall directly into the water. You make a big splash. Judith imagined herself breaking through the surface of the crystal clear water. A tingling sensation stirred about her body. It felt like tiny brushes were moving about her body, gently scrubbing the surface of her skin. There was a disturbing element about her lake. All the fish were dead, floating upside down at the top of the water. She swam to the surface, as Mark commanded her to, and climbed over the rock edge. The cavernous area was open before her, rock arches, caves in the walls. She smelled something faint and rotten in the distance. "Explore the cave," Mark said. "You will eventually find a tunnel longer than many of the others. Go into it. Keep walking." She found a winding tunnel. The walls were moist. Portions of it were covered in slimy moss. She moved deeper into the cave. The smell of rot intensified. It began to grow unbearable. She couldn't go deeper. It is deep within this tunnel that you'll find your truth. You'll discover who you truly are, the vast potential of your personality. She heard a low rumbling from deep in the cave. It reverberated through the walls and her feet. She heard a moist scraping noise that accompanied the rumbling. The noises were heavy. She got the impression that what produced them was very large. Then eyes began to glow in the darkness. Hundreds of them, flashing numerous colors. The sight of this froze her with terror. She could vaguely hear Mark speaking, a muffled voice in the distance, but she couldn't understand any of his words. She was too deep now. This strange new world was sucking her in, overtaking her. The smell of decay had grown so intense, she could hardly breathe without gagging. She felt something rough and scaly move up her leg toward her abdomen. It looped around her waist like a coiling snake. She felt the same rough, prickly things wrap around her ankles and arms. She writhed, trying to get away, but the grip around her body was too strong. It constricted her. It pulled her squirming, fighting body toward the bright colors that now frantically flashed. Judith screamed. She screamed with all her strength, in the hope of shattering herself free of this world. The monster roared back, a sound that resembled a horde of hissing snakes and a lion combined. Then there was an explosion of light, and then all was darkness. "Judith! Judith, can you hear me?" These words summoned her forth from the dark abyss that contained her. The words sounded foggy and faint, but frantically she swam up toward them. She wanted to be free. She wanted the nightmare to end. The words gradually became clearer. Her movements through the abyss became easier. The grasp of the abyss loosened. The darkness thinned. It dissipated like parting clouds, and she found herself laying on the floor of Mark's apartment, with his worried face looking down at her. Her head ached. She felt dizzy. Other than that, she felt pretty good. The nightmare was over. "Are you okay?" Mark said. "I think so," she said. "My head hurts. I'm dizzy, like you said, but otherwise..." She cringed in pain. "What's wrong?" "My abdomen hurts. So do my wrists, my legs." She lifted her shirt and saw bloody marks across her stomach and side. It almost looked like bloody tire marks. She saw the same on her arms and legs. "My gosh," Mark said. "What happened?" "I don't know." "You're the one that took me there. Shouldn't you have an idea?" She felt a sting of anger in that moment. She wanted to smack the look of worry off his face, but she felt too dizzy and in pain to do it. It was just a hypnotism session. Normally it's never had this type of effect on a person. I've had them done to me. The results for me were positive. I've tried it with other friends. Where did you take me? Huh? I went to this cave. A monster tried to eat me. It was this horrible nightmare. That's not what's happened before, like I said. Usually it doesn't really have an effect. My friends usually just feel a little bit dizzy, and they usually make fun of the whole experience. I just want to go home. Well, let me take you to the doctor or something. No, I'm fine. I just want to go home and clean up and get some sleep. She slowly got to her feet. I'm sorry, he said, opening the door for her. I think I'm done with parties for a while, she thought. Yeah, she said, and walked out without looking at him. That night, Judith soaked in the shower for nearly 2 hours. Most of that time she sat on the floor as the water drummed her back. She simply felt stunned by the whole experience. When she first returned to normal consciousness, she just wanted to get away, to get to a safe place of shelter. Fight or flight mode, and her mind immediately engaged in flight. Now she did have that safer isolation and was able to examine the terrible cut marks around her body. A new wave of shocking realization hit her like a collision with a brick wall. The place she had gone had been real. It had had a real effect on her body. She was a victim of something horrible that she didn't fully understand. She wept, and then she sat in silence as the water drenching her body became cold. She began to shiver and didn't get out until one of her roommates knocked on the door asking how she was doing. She dressed and isolated herself in her bedroom. She couldn't sleep. It was as though the memory of the experience was a cobweb, and her mind was entangled in it. If only she had stayed within the confines of her comfortable routines, this never would have happened. Judith felt guilty. This was her fault. She was sure of it. That's what she gets for daring to go outside her protective bubble. For the next few days, she wandered about her life with a dejected, slumped posture. Her mind rarely engaged in any of her class lectures or her studies. Her grades began to suffer. She was late 3 times for work and got suspended. She never tried to interact with Mark again. She didn't believe that he could truly help her. He seemed just as confused by the experience as she was, and besides, she felt too embarrassed to interact with him again. Long showers became a frequent part of her routine. It was really the only place where she felt some element of comfort. There was a stain on some deep part of her soul, and she wanted to wash it away. Sitting in the shower, as irrational as it was, felt the closest to cleansing. But showering wasn't enough. Water alone couldn't remove the horrible stain she felt deep within her mind and heart. She went about her daily life pretending that everything was fine. If anyone saw through a crack in her facade of well-being, she lied. She told them she just had a little trouble sleeping or she was feeling a little under the weather. The truth of her horror and guilt was openly revealed when she was alone in her room, ruminating about her experience. Something terrible truly had been stirred awake in the caverns of her mind that night with Mark, and it still wanted her. A new side effect had developed from her experience. She didn't know any technical term for what she was going through. A psychologist or neurologist might describe her experience as phantom impressions, but to Judith, she believed it was the beast within the cave, still seeking to devour her. All the cuts on her body had healed as weeks passed, but every so often, Judith would sometimes awaken in the middle of the night, gripped by a terrible pain that radiated throughout her body. She was sure it was those scaly, rough appendages trying to overtake her. Then there were the voices, a gradual rise from the depths of her mind like water reaching a boiling temperature. Some of the voices were guttural and heavy, some an eerie, whispery hiss, and others a maniacal and high-pitched sound. They all shared one common element. They were voices of destruction. They were voices from mouths that wanted to chew her into bits and spit her remaining bones into an untidy pile. The process of cutting herself came about by a kind of evolution. At first, when Judith awoke from the nightmares of being lost in the caves, she would deal with the pain and the stress of the voices screaming in her head by pulling wads of hair from her head. Strangely, the physical pain of pulling her hair subsided the inner pain of the voices and the phantom impressions. Pulling her hair evolved to squeezing her skin to the point of leaving a bruise. It was like a terrible pressure was building inside her, and she had to break something to release the pressure. Pulling her hair wasn't enough. Bruising her skin wasn't enough. Then one evening, inspiration struck, as she watched one of her roommates cut into a steak. All the meaty juices poured out in the slice. Judith could almost imagine the piece of meat sighing. Maybe that was the key. Maybe that was the secret of setting herself free. One late night, she tried it in the shower. Exhilaration and horror exploded inside her all at once, her body shaking from the adrenaline surge. She cried that first time as she washed her blood down the drain. It was tears of relief. The voices were gone. The pain, despite the sting in the area where she had cut herself, was completely gone. She was free, at least for a time, not permanently. Weeks later, the nightmare returned, as well as the other side effects. Judith followed the cutting ritual each time, almost religiously, like a penance process. That night, the voices called for her blood again. They called for another sacrifice. Judith went to the bathroom and locked the door behind her. She looked at herself in the mirror, thin, pale. The skin under her eyes was sagging. There was a scar on her neck from a previous cutting. Judith no longer recognized herself. Maybe she was discovering her true self, as the shell was gradually disintegrating and crumbling away. Cutting away, she thought, grimacing as she pulled the knife from a drawer. She then entered the shower, turned on the water, and dropped to her knees. She gazed into the blade for a moment. A faint, distorted reflection of herself looked back. That was her true self reflected back to her in the blade, a deformed monster, a representation of all the pain the blade absorbed. The voices clamored in her head. Pain constricted her body, that inner pain, the grasp of the monster. She bent forward, fighting it. The time was now. She lined the tip of the blade with her trembling wrist. She took a deep breath, gritted her teeth, and made the jab, pushing the blade into her flesh. Hot fire flowed up her arm. Judith gasped and moaned. Blood oozed from the wound. She watched it flow down the drain, overwhelmed by the paroxysm that gripped her. Every muscle in her body clenched. Her eyes nearly bulged from their sockets. Despite the physical agony, the voices drained from her mind. Their ferocious, garbled roar subsided until all was quiet, except her panting breath and the flow of the water. Later that night, as she bandaged her wound, she enjoyed her relief and whispered a silent prayer in the hope that the monster within would finally be pacified.